Hey media, today we're moving on to a new unit about the news. And this unit really won't be about understanding current events. We'll certainly read about current events when we read different reports and watch different news stories, but mostly this unit is focused on how the news is reported, meaning the word choice, the images, the organizational patterns. All of that matters when we're reading the news. And often we only think about getting the facts or the information from our news, but I also want you to consider how that news is portrayed or given to you. So to begin, I want us to focus on this word bias and understand what this word means and how it might affect our understanding of the news. So bias, the actual definition, is a positive or negative attitude towards something based on preconceived prejudices. So here are some trivial examples for you. I have certain biases. One of my biases is that tater tots are better than waffle fries. Now, you may disagree with me, and that may be your personal bias, but personally, anytime I'm at a restaurant, if I get the option, I'm taking the tater tots. Here's another example for you. I think that Harry Potter is better than Lord of the Rings, books and movies. Now, some of you maybe like Lord of the Rings better. Maybe some of you don't like either of them. If you're smart, you're with me and you know that Harry Potter is better. But these are just examples of bias. Now, bias doesn't have to be something is better than something else. Another bias that I have is that school is important. I, of course, think that learning is important, but I think the actual act of school, of going to school, of learning responsibility with due dates, of communicating with teachers and peers, of having a community, I think all of that is important. So that's a personal bias that I have. I think it's maybe a good bias if I'm a teacher, right? That I think that school is important and learning is important. So our values, that next bullet point that I have, can create biases. My bias on education is shaped by that value that I have, that education and learning are important in our lives. For a lot of people, our opinions begin with how we're raised, right? Maybe your parents have certain viewpoints and maybe you agree with those viewpoints because that's what you have been introduced to as you've grown up. Often as students move out of their homes and become young adults, that's a time in their lives, usually when they're questioning, do they believe the same thing as their parents? Do they believe some things that are different or maybe completely different? That's often a very exploratory period. And it's important to consider what are your own opinions? Of course, they might line up with your parents, but it's good to consider where you're getting your opinions from. Now, when we're thinking about bias, we should consider why we care regarding news reports. Well, news, by definition, should be just the facts. We read the news, we watch the news, we listen to the news so that we can understand what's going on in the US and in the world. Now, if someone puts their opinion into the news, that might be bias, and they might be trying to convince us of something, but persuasion and informing, those are two different things. So if we have a reporter who's trying to persuade their audience of something instead of just informing them about the facts, well, now we have bias that's seeping into that reporting. It's important to note that there are some news reports that are labeled opinion, right? Sometimes they're called editorials. Now that, of course, they're telling you this is going to be my opinion on what's going on. This isn't a factual report. They might have facts to back up their opinion. So it's important to understand which part of the news you're reading. And when they're labeling and saying, here's my opinion on what's going on, then it's okay for them to put their bias in because it's, of course, their opinion. But if I'm reading a news report about, if I want an update on what's going on with coronavirus, with COVID-19, I just want the facts. I want to know how many new cases there are, how many there are in my county, right? I don't want someone's opinion. I only want the facts. When we're reading the news, it's also important to consider confirmation bias theory. And confirmation bias theory says that we are likely to seek out information or sources that will confirm our beliefs. Here's an example for you. My husband is very fit and healthy. He likes to eat well. He exercises. And my best friend, while certainly she encourages those behaviors as well, isn't nearly as healthy. So if I've had a long day of work and I come home and I am wondering to myself, should I work out or should I watch TV? Well, I know who I want to go ask. If I go ask my husband, he'll say, working out is good for you. It will help relieve stress. And then you should go eat a salad when you're done, right? Actually, he would tell me to eat some protein. But my best friend, if I say, oh, I've had such a long day, should I work out or should I watch TV? She is likely to say, you know what, you deserve to sit on the couch, go get yourself a snack, go enjoy, watch some Friends, watch The Office. So I know who I should seek out to confirm the beliefs I already have, right? In my mind, I'm already laying on that couch watching Friends, and I just want someone to confirm that belief. It's kind of like if you know to go to mom or dad, if you're asking permission for something and you know which one will say yes, that's kind of what confirmation bias theory is. So the same thing happens with news. If we seek out certain sources, they probably will confirm the ideas that we already have. Now, this leads us to ideas on conservatism, and liberalism. And these are really big ideas. I am not a history or a civics teacher, so I'm going to give you the very simplified version. And this is one unit where I really wish we were together as a class so that I could grab everybody's opinions and you could add your knowledge to this as well. But keep that confirmation bias theory in mind as we move to a little bit of the political spectrum here. So this chart is from the 2016 Clinton-Trump election, and you can see liberal on the left there. The bars are labeled with their blue, and then conservative is over on the right in red. And these are just news sources that favored certain candidates. So you can see a couple news sources favored Trump, right? And they maybe would make him look like the better candidate. And there certainly were several that were liberal and favored Clinton. Now, here's again the very watered down, simplified version of liberal and conservative. These are two different political groups, and it's often there's a lot of divisiveness in our country right now and what's called polarization, right? That we have this strong pull against each other. And part of my belief is that a lot of people fall actually more towards the middle. It's hard to find someone who's completely liberal or someone who's completely conservative. So it's also hard to define those things. But liberals believe more in the federal government, that we and that's one reason that they believe in increased taxes, because those taxes will go to help communities around the nation. That will, taxes help improve our roads and give us libraries and all of those things. Conservatives would like more power in the state and local government and give more individuality, I guess you could call it, and more freedom for states and local governments to choose what they would like to do with those taxes. They believe more in big business, that would be conservatives, and in capitalism, right, competition. In terms of spending, liberals would prefer to spend on welfare options that help people in communities, and conservatives prefer to spend on defense that would protect our country, right? Some values that liberals have also include they have a strong focus on education. They would be supporters of gay marriage, of pro-choice, or a woman, being able to have an abortion if that's what she chooses. Our conservatives, if we're going for the stereotypes, we would certainly talk about Second Amendment, right, and the right to bear arms. They believe in pro-life, that they believe abortion is murder, right, and so pro-life would be their option. And generally is more religious based, would be conservative. So that's the very simplified version. So now when we're focusing on these news sources that are giving us reports, we can see that news like Fox News really favors conservative candidates, whether it be Trump or someone else, and liberal like New York Times, they're on the very bottom, certainly lean very liberal. So the ideal would be to find a news source that's right on the line, right? And that doesn't exist. Wall Street Journal maybe comes pretty close, but they still lean a little bit liberal. So if we lived in an ideal world, we would certainly have news sources that fell right in the middle, but we generally don't. And if you think about it, the news is reported by people. People have opinions, people have biases, and so the reports and the paper itself is likely to lean one way or the other. You could also consider the paper has an editor, right? Well, if that editor is conservative or liberal, that certainly tempers how she or he would output that news. Now, when we're looking at this chart, I would consider, obviously there are way more news sources than are listed, but you can see that many of them are liberal, right? There are only a couple conservatives. So you might be questioning, why are there more liberal news sources in general? A lot of people believe that there are more in general. Well, a couple of reasons. Most news sources are located in large cities, right? City centers instead of in rural areas. And cities generally tend to be liberal. Even if you've seen a map of liberal and conservative areas in Minnesota, you can see Minnesota is a liberal state, but certainly there's a strong liberal base around the Twin Cities, which is a large city center, compared to some of the outskirts or some of the rural areas that might be more conservative. So there just really aren't newspapers in those areas, and maybe that's the main reason. I also kind of tend to believe that jobs tend to lean more liberal or conservative, and maybe just the job of being a reporter attracts more liberal individuals than conservative individuals. Now, there's certainly conservatives in the news, right? But if you think about certain jobs like, police officers generally tend to lean conservative, teachers generally tend to lean liberal. A lot of careers have a lean, whether it's liberal or conservative. And again, that's not to say that there aren't liberal police officers, that there aren't conservative teachers. There certainly are. And it's important to know, we're all individuals. You can't typecast and say this career is all this political party, but it's something to consider. Here's another image that you might want to consider. And maybe you see some of your own news sources here. So again, ideally, we would be hanging out in the center, that we don't have this strong pull to the left or to the right. So sources like NPR, BBC, Associated Press, you've probably heard of, that is that AP source. Reuters is another news source that might be right down the middle. And again, it's impossible to find one that's right down the middle. If you read articles in NPR, you will certainly find some that are liberal and some that are conservative. So this is just a chart that was created to help you understand left, center, and right. I also want to call your attention to, let's look at the left side over here. You can see here's CNN on the second to the left, and then far to the left, we've got CNN Opinion. So even though it's made by the same group, you can see different news types. They added the word opinion, so obviously it will be an opinion. You can see the same thing. Here's NPR in the center, but if you move over one column to the left, here's NPR Opinion, and that leans to the left. Same thing over here on the right. On the second to the last column here, Fox News would be a more conservative news source. They're not in the center. They're certainly not on the left. And then far right would be Fox News Opinion. So they too do something similar where they have multiple channels. And it's just good to know. If I'm watching the news and I see the word opinion, then I know that it's individuals' opinions. It might not be completely factual. Maybe their opinions are based on facts, but it is in fact their opinion. My main goal in this unit is to ensure that you are reading multiple news sources. Really, that's the only way that we're going to get a full picture of what's truly going on. Now, there's nothing wrong with reading people's opinions. I think that's important. But if we're trying to look for factual news, the actual events that are happening in the world, we should be reading multiple news sources. We should be reading from the left, the center, and the right. If we're only reading those news sources that confirm our own beliefs, right, that confirmation bias theory, then we're missing part of the story. So my main goal for this unit will be to see and make sure that we are reading multiple news sources so that we can get the best understanding of current events that we can.